Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Starting March 9th, your supply chain possibilities are endless. At Modex 2020, you'll find 950 plus exhibits and 150 plus education sessions tailored to help you discover equipment and system solutions for your material handling and supply chain needs. With keynotes, networking, education, and product booths, Modex is where manufacturing and supply chain innovation comes to life. Visit modexshow.com today and join us March 9th to March 12th, 2020 at Georgia World Congress Center in Atlanta. Register today at modexshow.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hi guys, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, and this week I am joined by Chantelle Fitzgerald of Mindset Strategy. She's the founder and CEO, and I told you guys last week in my email newsletter, teased it a little bit and showed you the episode that I did with her on her show called Mindset from RVN TV. And we talked a little bit about my journey there. But I wanted to bring Chantelle on, and I've kind of been talking a little bit about this on social media and a little bit on the email as well, about emotional intelligence and things of that nature. So I wanted to bring her on and kind of discuss that a little bit, because that's a lot of what she deals with in her coaching and things of that nature. So she's going to talk to us a little bit about that and talk to us about how we can kind of apply that as managers in the supply chain distribution space. So Chantelle, welcome to the New Warehouse. How are you?
Hello. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be on here. Thank you so much for having me.
Definitely. I'm happy to have you on. I know we did your show last week, and it just wasn't enough time, right? So you need a little more time to talk, right?
Exactly.
Definitely. So why don't you tell us about yourself first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Chantelle Fitzgerald, as you said. And yeah, I am a leadership development trainer. So we go into different companies and organizations, school districts and universities, really training leaders how to become more effective by being more present. And so we teach them very specific tools in the realm of mindfulness and emotional intelligence and a bit of the neuroscience to help them be more effective.
Okay, great. So then how did you get into that, actually?
Yeah, it's a long story. I'm always trying to figure out how to tell the story in a short snippet.
Okay. Yeah, we got a little
so
bit
let me give it a shot. Yeah, I've had quite the diverse background and quite the experience. So I started out in undergrad as a French major and majored in French and was a secondary certification. So I became a French teacher, studied abroad. Lived in France, taught French, and came back to the U.S., taught French, and realized I was disciplining kids more than I was actually teaching French. I was like, you know what? I'm going to switch gears and get into something very similar, which was pharmaceutical sales. That is
very similar. Right.
Very similar. So I ended up becoming a legal drug dealer and sold cardiovascular medications until the downturn of the economy in 2008, and ended up getting laid off and was trying to figure out, okay, what is my next best move? So I went back to grad school, got a master's in nonprofit leadership, and then worked in the nonprofit sector for about 7 years as well.
Interesting.
And all along my journey, there's always been sticky and tricky situations in the workplace. And, you know, dealing maybe with a difficult boss or being in a toxic work environment, or maybe dealing with colleagues that maybe aren't the most supportive. I've always was challenged by that and never really had the tools to help support me. And so by switching to different industries, I thought, oh, maybe it'll get better in this one. Oh, maybe it'll get better. And, you know, as I moved along, you know, there's always challenges in leadership. And I ended up going back to school and getting trained, and I ended up getting certified in a program called Search Inside Yourself, which is a program that was founded out of Google that blends mindfulness with emotional intelligence and the neuroscience. And in that program, they really teach you very specific, very tangible tools to help you become more effective as a leader. And so, you know, I just felt like, wow, you know, I could have used these tools when, you know, I was working at all of these different industries.
Definitely.
And so I just felt like there was a need to really help leaders be more effective in what they do, how to treat people, how to be better leaders as it relates to managing a team, how to manage your own emotions when you're getting frustrated, upset, annoyed. How do you manage yourself so that you can be more effective? So I just felt that there was such a need, and there's so many people out there that are in jobs that they don't like, that are really frustrating. Perhaps they don't like management, or perhaps they just don't like their role and they don't know where to go next. What is their next best move? And so, you know, by helping people kind of go deeper within themselves to see what it is that they really want, but also to help them, you know, better manage people and be a better leader as well.
Okay. Interesting. So it's an interesting journey, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So very interesting. And do you still speak French a little bit?
Yeah, I do. In fact, oui, je parle français. Oui.
Okay. Yeah, I took French for like 3 years in high school. But I'll say that I lost most of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't use it, you lose it for sure.
Yeah,
and I will say I learned more French when I was living in France for 8 months than I did 8 years of studying French, actually.
Definitely, yeah. Same thing happened to me. I spent a month in Italy, and I had Italian instruction every morning. And I picked it up so fast living there. And then as soon as I got back, there was no one to speak to, and I lost it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you don't use your language, you can lose a lot of it because then you forget vocabulary and the structures of grammar and sentences. So
Definitely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what your company actually does, Mindset Strategies?
Yeah, so Mindset Strategies, we go into different companies and work with them over 6, 9, 12-month period of time.
Okay.
And we really help, in some particular cases, we really help managers become better and more have tools to help support them to grow into the next level. So oftentimes a leadership will have some leaders that they want to grow into the next level. And so they hire us, Mindset Strategies, to go in to really help these leaders become better. And so we do group trainings, and then we do one-on-one coaching as well. And then we really support the organization through consulting and really help support their growth and the direction in which they want to move.
Okay, interesting. So now one of the concepts I want to talk about today, right? So, and this was one of the things I think we kind of first connected on a little bit, right? And we connected, how did we connect? LinkedIn, through Ryder.
Yes.
Women's Council.
Exactly.
Like that, right?
Exactly. I've done a training with Ryder, and you're an alum from there.
Yes. And I think some of my connections from the Ryder Supply Chain Club, I'll give them a shout out.
Yes.
I know they're listening. They better be listening.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, they connected with you, and that's, I guess, how we connected. So, and it was over emotional intelligence, I think.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And in fact, I think it might have been Sabrina Rom, actually, who
right.
helped us
your intern
connect.
now,
yes,
right?
and she's amazing. I love her. So shout out to Sabrina. I love her. You're amazing. Thank you for everything. But yeah, I had done a leadership training for that group. It's a young women's professional group at Ryder, and they are connected with Ryder alum that are their mentors. And so I had done an emotional intelligence and mindfulness training for Ryder for that group.
Okay, great. So why don't you tell us, I guess, for the people that are listening that are not so familiar with emotional intelligence, why don't you tell us a little bit about, I guess, what is emotional intelligence, and then we'll kind of get into how we can apply that in like a management perspective and distribution kind of space.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to use the definition of Daniel Goleman. So Daniel Goleman is the guru, the expert who wrote the book, Emotional Intelligence. Yeah. And his definition is really about knowing one's own thoughts, emotions, and to be more effective as a leader. And so that's paraphrasing, but really it's about knowing one's own thoughts, emotions, to then be able to decipher, what's the best next move in, in a situation. And so emotional intelligence is really about first becoming self-aware. I mean, that is the first building block of becoming emotionally intelligent is self-awareness. And so we train a lot of leaders around self-awareness. And self-awareness is really about this idea of going from like blurriness of knowing yourself to kind of HD. And self-awareness is really about emotional awareness. Are you aware of your emotions in a particular moment? So if you get an email that really makes you upset or pisses you off, or just seeing the name of somebody's, the name of somebody coming through your email, you might actually have.
Yeah, what does this person want now?
An emotional reaction to that. And it's knowing that emotional reaction, being aware of that, because oftentimes there might be a trigger and we'll just immediately react, like, oh my gosh, Joe Smith is emailing me again, or, whoever. And you get really frustrated, and because of whatever reason. And so are you aware in that moment about your emotions, and how can you take a pause, take a breath to then be able to figure out what is your next best move?
Right. Instead of pounding on that keyboard, right?
Yeah, exactly. And firing off an email that you might later regret.
Definitely. So I mean, I think that's really an important thing. I know when we had talked previously, like we're talking about in like the kind of distribution manufacturing environment, it's so high pressure and there's so many fast moving parts, and, work is constantly moving and moving. I think it's really, really important that, emotional intelligence comes into play, because like you said, like there's a lot of high emotion, and if you're not self-aware about it and you don't know that you're like reacting, or maybe you know that you're reacting but you're not holding yourself back, you can create like a really tense environment. And for the employees themselves that work for you, they can almost be scared of you at some point. It's like they don't want to like tell you something bad happened because you react like crazy, instead of being aware of like, okay, I'm upset that something bad happened, but let me approach this in a different way, and like, how do we learn from this mistake instead of, just blaming somebody and pointing fingers, and create that more kind of open communication. So, how can people kind of take the idea of emotional intelligence, and how can they kind of help themselves, like through coaching or other methods? Like, how can they start to look at themselves in that way and kind of assess if they need some help?
Yeah. So part of our training is taking a tiny step back before emotional intelligence, and I want to bring in the piece of mindfulness.
Okay.
The reason why I say that is because mindfulness helps us to be present, and mindfulness helps to ground us to the present moment. So whether that is, mindfulness, and I guess there's lots of definitions around what that means, but mindfulness means just to be present, be in the moment without judgment, with kindness and curiosity to yourself. So the reason why I mentioned that first is, in the distribution space where there's a lot of things happening, simultaneously, are you present in the moment, or are you even reacting? So the reason why I start with mindfulness is because it helps you to be more present. You're training yourself to maybe just be aware of your breath for a moment, helps you to bring yourself to the present moment. So when things are going, there's lots happening, are you present in that? As a start. And when you are present in that moment, then you can start to develop that self-awareness of your own self. So I would, recommend, people starting a daily meditation practice because it helps to center you. When things go chaotic, you can train yourself to be more calm in the chaos, if that makes sense. So what are some things that people can do to help them in the distribution center where there might be some chaotic things happening? There's lots of things moving around.
Definitely.
I would give you a 3 breaths practice, actually, and perhaps we can even do it together. But this is one tool where you literally take 3 breaths. The first breath, you pay attention to your inhale.
Okay.
The second breath you take, we can take one together, and you pay attention to your exhale. And the third breath you take, you ask yourself, what is the priority right now? And so just by taking those 3 breaths can really help to center yourself. And identify what is the priority right now. If you have so many things going on, especially in a distribution center where they're, like as you described, just taking 3 breaths to center yourself and ask yourself, what is the priority? And so, but it does take awareness of yourself first to even know that you need the 3 breaths, if that is helpful. So being aware of oneself, taking those 3 breaths and, reorienting yourself back to what is needed.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. So I mean, the self-awareness. So now how do we take that step to become, I guess, more self-aware? Because, a lot of people, I've definitely worked with people like this, and I've probably been like this myself a couple of times, are kind of reacting like right away. How do we kind of train ourselves to take that pause before we react?
Yeah. One of the best ways is honestly through meditation. If you pick up a daily meditation practice, it can help you to pause before reacting. And so there's a lot of neuroscience out there talking about meditation and how that can actually change the structures and functions of your brain. Neuroscientists talk about the what's called neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is a neuroscience term that means whatever you think, do, and pay attention to can actually change the structures and functions of your brain. So basically, if you meditate daily over time, you're literally rewiring your brain to be more calm. There are studies that show that the longer you meditate, the more attention, the area of the brain that's responsible for attention control has more activity in those people that have meditated for long periods of time. And so, when you practice meditation over time, your first reaction will be to pause because you've trained yourself. So for example, and just to get into a little bit more neuroscience, you have what's called the amygdala of our brain, which is that fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain. And that's what's being triggered when you react to something, or that's like when an email comes through or somebody says something that you don't like, you're going to be immediately triggered, and that can cause a reaction. And what meditation does is it works on the prefrontal cortex of our brain. And the prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that's responsible for decision making.
Okay.
And so when we train our brains, when we focus on our breath, we're actually rewiring our prefrontal cortex. So, and maybe this is better like observed, like if you saw like a chart, but if you just imagine your amygdala going off, it's sending a message to your prefrontal cortex saying, oh my gosh, we need to freak out right now. I can't believe this. We need to react. And it sends a signal back to your amygdala to say, yes, we need to freak out. Alarm bells. Let's go. Let's do this.
Let's freak out.
It's on. Let's freak out. But with meditation, you're actually training your prefrontal cortex to slow down. You don't need to be so reactive.
Okay.
And so with meditation, over time, you're training your prefrontal cortex to slow down. So when you do get that email by Joe Smith, let's say, and I'm not calling out any specific Joe Smith.
You must have had some issue with Joe Smith in the past. I don't know.
No, it's a totally generic name. Joe Schmo. I know that's always used. And I don't know why it's Joe. Why do we pick on Joe? I don't know.
It rhymes, I guess. That's why.
But anyway, when you see that email come through of, somebody that, triggers you, your first reaction will be to pause and to take a breath and say, you know what? I'm going to not respond to that right now, and I will get back to it in a little bit. That will be your first reaction. But this is something that takes time and takes practice. So your question in terms of how do we become more self-aware?
Right.
What are some things that we can do? That 3 breaths practice, practicing meditation, because in the present moment, you become more aware of yourself and others. And this is also what we teach in our trainings when we work with clients, we take them through lots of different exercises that will help them become more self-aware. And most people think that they're self-aware, but we haven't actually done exercises that are helpful, that can actually help us be more aware of ourselves.
Okay. Interesting. So, yeah, I think it's really a concept that probably needs to be applied even further in like a distribution logistics space. Because like I said before, it really is like high stress. And I've definitely worked with some people and been around some people in the space that work in the stress gets to them and they do kind of like snap at times. And it does have like a long lasting effect on the employees, because sometimes, you'll see where, because me, myself, if you can't tell, I'm a very calm person. But,
yes.
So like me, myself, like that kind of reaction, it takes a lot for me to react like very much like that. So, in that sense, I always kind of sometimes get the contrast of like, I hear from the employee like, oh, like, I'm afraid of so-and-so, the other manager, because of the way they react to things and stuff like that. And, so I think it's really important thing to take into consideration. And then I think like as the manager and the leaders start to take that on as well, I think even passing those methodologies on to the employees themselves can make the overall atmosphere and overall working environment probably a lot more calmer, and at times like make those very like high pressure, high stress, like peak season times, make them seem like maybe they're not so bad anymore. So how would you say, like, as a leader, if a leader takes away these learnings, right, and they start to practice them their own, put them into practice for themselves, how can they kind of implement that and pass it on to like their staff to like, how can they make it kind of almost a collective thing?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot of what you said is that for leaders, this practice of mindfulness and being present and being aware of oneself is so important. And it's really important that leaders embody this, because they set the example for others. And so if an employee sees their manager freak out, is very reactive, and is highly stressed and passes along, the same type of behavior, that employee is going to see that behavior as okay and that's acceptable. Right. And then it can kind of create this, toxic work environment. There's an example of a colleague of mine who had mentioned that their high-level executive would be at meetings and be, typing on their computer and checking emails and, checking their messages on their phone, and while somebody's presenting in the meeting.
Not really
and
being
so
present.
Yeah, exactly. And not really being present. And so just those little things, like, yes, as executives, we are busy. There's a lot that we have to handle. But just that mini move of being, on your electronics in a meeting while somebody else is presenting sends a message that as an executive, you don't really care about the person who is speaking. You're not really, you are the example. And so therefore it sends a message to everybody else that it's okay to be that way. So in the distribution space, if a manager is reactive, is stressed, is, a bit toxic, that's only going to pass down to everyone else. Right. And it's a model for that. So how do we change that? Through training, through leadership. It's really training leaders to be more effective by teaching them tools of how not to be so reactive, how to slow down, how to be more effective by having tools to listen better. In our trainings with Mindset Strategies, we do a lot of training on listening, because that is one of the most important skills that we could have, and yet we don't really listen to each other.
Right.
We tend to cut people off in the middle of conversation. We're trying to think of how to solve this problem. We're thinking about where this person is going. Like, we have so much happening in our minds as somebody is speaking to us that it's really hard to just be present with that other person.
Definitely.
And if we are just present with that other person, we don't have an agenda in our minds and we're just there, that could actually solve a lot of problems. Because when we do this training in our classes, in our courses, people feel heard. And that's one of the biggest things, is that people just want to be heard. And if you can support your employees by listening to them, by understanding where they're coming from, that could also really help to change a culture.
Definitely. I think, the last kind of point that you touched on there, I've been reading the emotional intelligence Harvard Review papers or whatever. And one of the articles in there, it talks about, how do you become a better listener and, better conversation with people. And it's basically, remove, I think it says remove I, me, and my, and replace it with you. Right. So instead of saying like, oh, I, this and that, like, say, you, what about you? Like, what did you do this weekend? Or like, how are you feeling? Right. Not like, oh, this is how I'm feeling, and then that's it. Right. So I think that's really important. And, you had an interesting point where, if the executive or the highest level is reacting in a certain way, it just kind of works its way down the ladder. Like, because I've seen it too, where it's like, well, my boss yelled at me, so I'm going to yell at you. And then like, the person that reports to you and you yelled at them, like, they have people that report to them and they're like, well, my boss yelled at me, so I'm going to yell at you because, this isn't getting done because you guys aren't doing it. And then everybody's like pointing the finger down. And then at the end, the person that doesn't have anybody that reports to them is like, oh, I hate this.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it feels like they become the scapegoat of all the problems that, had happened all along before it even got to them.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. So as leaders, being open also to training, being open to know that, we don't know everything. For me personally, I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly going to different leadership trainings myself, even as a leadership trainer myself. So I think it's so important to be open to learning new things, to learning new skills, to better yourself, but also how to better manage other people. And so part of emotional intelligence is about self-awareness. It's about managing your own emotions under stress and pressure. It's about motivations. What motivates you? Why are you here? It's about empathy, how do we have empathy for others and see where other people are coming from? And it's really about leadership and compassion and social skills, and how do we better relate to other people and act with compassion towards our employees as leaders. And there is a difference between empathy and compassion. And, empathy is, seeing similarities in other people, but compassion is really about seeing where they are maybe struggling. And then as a leader, ask that person or ask that employee who might be struggling, what would be of service? Okay. And so how can we help them? Be better. As a leader, it's my job to make sure that my team is, performing at the best level possible. So how do I have compassion for the person who is struggling that might be dropping the ball? How do I help train them to get up to speed? And what would serve them best to get them up to speed? So being that type of leader, and all of those things is part of emotional intelligence.
All right. Interesting. So I do have a question for you. So, when you talk about, the empathy and the compassion, so a lot of times, what I've heard from peers and stuff in the industry is, they don't want to get too connected to the employee in a way, I guess. Like they don't want to have, they don't want to become friends, basically, right? So how do you kind of, I guess, walk that line of having the empathy and the compassion for the employees, but, not taking it too far, whereas you maybe give the impression of friendship and the employee then kind of maybe takes advantage a little bit? How do you kind of, I guess, define that line?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it depends on the situations. Right. So for example, if you are the leader and you are the manager of a team, and maybe one of your employees, is a hard worker, and but one day, their child got sick, and they had to leave work early, and and then the next day they couldn't come in because their child maybe has chicken pox or something, and they're going to be out for a couple weeks or a couple days, and as a leader, being empathetic and being understanding of that person's situation, while also, maybe you don't pile on, all the work, knowing that, this person is sick with their kid, and you're giving them like 20 more things to do, because there are ways that we can, disperse the spread it out a little bit. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, in that situation, having empathy, knowing that, I too, have a child and my child's sick, and understanding where people are coming from that. And that this person is really good, at what they do. Is an example of, having empathy for somebody and not, docking them because they were sick or their situation. But walking the fine line of, friendship versus manager, I think it really depends on various different relationships. And also it's a matter of, as the leader, standing in your own kind of role. And being very clear about expectations, and those, and what's expected of you, and, that this is a job and this is business and this is what we need to get done. Yeah. But on the other side, if you see somebody that's really struggling, that's not getting the job done, is there an opportunity for coaching and saying, hey, how can I get you better up to speed with this? As a leader, to have compassion and what would be of service for this person. Is it getting them extra training? Is it, working with them, a little bit longer, or whatever the case may be?
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective on it. Yeah, because I know I've seen where people, they don't want to be friends, so they just totally skew the opposite. And like any kind of personal interaction, I mean, they won't even say oh, how's your family doing? Because they're like, I don't want it to get too personal. But at the same time, I think, those little things, it creates like a world of difference, I think, in the workplace because, if people, like you said, people want to like kind of talk about themselves, right? They like to talk about themselves. So, asking them about that, getting them to open up like a little bit, I think makes a difference. And, I think it makes people feel like they're people too, right? Instead of just, just this placeholder and this process, right? Like, oh, you just move box from here to here and that's it. Like might as well be a machine, right? But making them feel like a person can make them kind of totally different perspective on their job. And then I think when you need to count on them, they're more likely to be there than not, right? Because, I've definitely seen where some people, they don't like their manager and they don't think that their manager really appreciates them or anything. And, they say, do you want to work overtime? And they say no. And then another manager that, does appreciate them or something like, do you want to work overtime? Sure. Yeah. For you, I'll do it. Yeah. And it's like totally different. And it's little things that don't take much time or investment, and just like taking one little conscious step could help you in the long run when you actually need it. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So definitely very interesting discussion, I think, on emotional intelligence. And I think it's something that is, I'm seeing it kind of becoming like more, not saying that was not a big thing before, but almost like I'm seeing it more on like social media and stuff. People are talking about it. Like I know, I don't know if you know Gary Vee.
Oh yeah, of
yeah,
course.
but he's talking about empathy like all the time now. So
so important.
So it's really, really interesting to see how that's kind of coming to the forefront a little bit now. So I think it's really important, and especially in our industry, to kind of take that into consideration, especially with like the high demand and like high stress levels that can be there to keep people almost keep them sane, I guess, in a way, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned meditation before. So I know there's like a lot of meditation apps out there and stuff. Do you have a recommendation for one?
Yeah, I do actually. I always recommend Insight Timer.
Okay.
It's a free app. They don't even advertise. It's totally word of mouth, and they have, millions of people on this app.
Yeah.
And they have an entire library of so many different meditations. So I highly recommend for people that are new to meditation to download the Insight Timer app, but there's also so many other apps out there too. Headspace, 10% Happier, Calm. Those are some of the main big ones, but whatever is that you prefer, but I definitely recommend Insight Timer. It's totally free.
Okay.
And a great app, and I'm on it. You could totally be friends with me. And there's also a Power in the Pause. That's one of our courses.
There's like a full friends thing too?
There's a friends component. You could do friends. It actually keeps track of your stats, so you can see how long you've meditated, over how long. You get special stars. You can see all the people that you've meditated with in that moment. So it's a really great app.
That's
as
very
well.
cool. All right, cool. So now, in the back of my head, right, I'm thinking of like that warehouse manager that's listening right now, and he's worked in the warehouse for like 35 years, and he's this big tough guy, and he's like, meditation, what is that? Like, I don't have time for that. What would you say is like the kind of the way to wrap your head around that and start like small? Like, how do you get past like that, I guess, misconception of like meditation is like, oh, it's like, I guess like hippie thing or something,
hippies,
right?
and for yogis, and Well, first of all, I would recommend checking out this video by Dan Harris on YouTube, where he totally talks about the 3 misconceptions of meditation. It's really funny. You can totally check it out on YouTube. It's Happier, puts it out there. And it's the 3, and it's really funny. And Dan Harris, he's a famous news anchor on Good Morning America, talks about, and he's also the founder of 10% Happier and all of this. But definitely watching that is a really funny video to talk about the misconceptions. Like, I don't have time for this. I'm too busy, and my mind wanders too much. This can't possibly be for me. And the neuroscience is really the kicker here in terms of how it actually changes your brain. So if we're talking about that, seasoned professional that's been in the distribution space for 35 years and is like, I don't want to, what is this all about?
Yeah.
I would encourage them to be open. Mm-hmm. We can always learn something new, and to just start off with 1 minute, 1 minute of meditation. Or we even say that if you just notice your breath, one inhale and one exhale, you've already done a meditation. So I would also challenge that person who's, been in the business for 35 years, is that he's probably already meditated before and just never knew it.
You definitely all taking a breath before.
Yes, exactly. And honestly, whenever you are in stress, whenever there is a chaotic moment, you can always go back to your breath.
Okay.
Your breath is your refuge. So in the distribution center, when there's so much going on, you have to get these products out by this deadline, because otherwise, the people aren't going to get their products. And it's an intense space. You can always go back to your breath as a pause and as a way to recalibrate, if you will, yourself, your mind, your emotions, to figure out what your next best move is. And so, I would just challenge anybody to just always go to their breath. Just notice the inhale and notice their exhale.
Okay. All right. Sounds really, really good. So now how can people get in touch with you and learn more about what you do? And maybe if they're interested in training, how do they go about that?
Yeah. So they can always go to my website. My website is mindsetstrategiesllc.com. Okay. You can also search for me on social media. I am Chantelle Fitzgerald on LinkedIn, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. I also have an Instagram page as well called Power in the Pause, because that's a course that I teach for individuals that want to learn how to start a daily meditation practice and learn these tools. So we work with individuals and we take them through a course called Power in the Pause. And it's also part of what we teach with our clients also.
Okay. All right. Really, really interesting. So thank you so much for coming on the New Warehouse podcast, and we'll definitely post all your information on the newwarehouse.com, and we'll definitely be doing some meditation now, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for coming on.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.